Reframing Mindset podcast, where I clear my head of the thoughts that are preventing clarity, practice my speech, among other things. Episodes range from informative knowledge to funny stories about my experiences, and in the future, maybe include interviews. So subscribe and enjoy. Episodes drop every other day. Okay, welcome back to Reframe Mindset podcast. My name is Cosmo. This episode talk about something actually I did while driving. Did while driving, I want to actually realize was that actually doing that experience, I know something I actually realized a lesson that they actually told me that it becomes apparent when actually doing right stuff like that. So boom, what happens is that you're actually on the road driving. And that's the thing that we actually become being a learner and stuff like that. Perspective of driving. I talk about things about hood, crips and all these stuff, gangs and all these stuff. Hoods, going to different hoods. And stuff like that. But it's like that's the thing we actually realize. Is that when out there to learn to drive, the perspective of thing is that you're gonna realize that the road the road is not ye- year years. Are you're gonna realize you don't you're still in the stage of actually owning stuff. You're still in the stage of trying to own stuff. So you're gonna realize that when you're driving, um you're out there so is a passenger. You're out there to take the bus and stuff like that. There's a normal way you're out there to going out and just go and go to a place. You go to a place and you actually just go and say, okay, I'm going to a place and doing these things. But what I actually realized was actually going, actually driving, was that you actually how novice it feels when actually going out and you actually there's a lesson that we actually learned was you going out, me going out and actually just driving and you're out there in the public, driving around in the public, and you're driving around in a certain neighborhood. So what happens is that, if you don't have permission, or you don't have per, if you don't understand that neighborhood or stuff like that, you're out there so driving into a domain that you don't know. That's the thing if you was driving. But the thing is that I was going to drive using driving classes. Is that what happens is that you're out there so going to the driving class and the person is carrying you somewhere. And what happens is that the way I was living. So that's the thing about living adulthood. Adulthood versus out there to university or growing up or stuff like that. When you're growing up in a certain family, they teach you certain principles. And when you actually become older, you actually you go through an experience of stuff and you realize that okay, you realize why things you actually have a kind of understanding of why things are. There's a driving and what and so what happened was that you thought you out there so going out and get a car. So boom, you're out there so in your home and you see people around driving around. And this is thing from birth until from your born until now. You see people driving around, but you do not know the reason what they're driving for. You do not know if they're out there so driving because and see it back in the background. You don't know the reason of what they are driving for. You don't know if they're driving what because they are learning, they're trying to go somewhere, they're driving to go all these things. All they know is that the road is there, and the thing about the road is that there's walk with you out, there's a walking all these stuff. Everybody's always doing the same thing. It's just a passage. It just a passage. So what happens is that you basically do that and you actually go on the road. So it's like they actually driving and doing this stuff, actually going to class and doing like refresher lessons, refresher lessons and stuff like that, or refreshing yourself with lessons and stuff like that. You're going to realize that and that's the thing with certain stuff. You're out there, so every time you're out there, so going out, say out there, so want to do certain stuff. there are different levels of things where it be like, oh, boom, unless it would be like, oh, my grandmother, even in her older years, and people always come back and say, oh, she could recall stuff from way back in the days and all. So even those days, she would always be studying. Because what? You have to actually you have to reinforce your stuff, and then not only that, when you reinforce stuff, if you do not catch up on your stuff, you're actually behind. You're actually behind in the sense that you're actually not as up as you thought you were. You're not as up in the game as you thought you were. So what do I mean by that? So there's getting the going through the process of getting the license and stuff like that. And what I realized growing up and all these stuff was I see people out there so driving or going to school and driving and stuff like that. What I realized was that you don't even know what they were even driving. When you actually reach this level, you're gonna realize that, oh, like more stuff becomes walking distance, and that's the thing about this level. You actually realize certain stuff that was hard to reach that you I would in back in the days I would say, okay, I'm gonna drive towards getting those stuff. Drive towards getting those. By me unlocking my license and other people are unlocking their license and stuff like that. All those stuff that seem impossible to reach at that time becomes 10 times more possible to reach where I'm at without driving. So it's like you're out there so saying like, oh my God, why in the world? And that's the thing with everything. Why in the world did I actually get a license? Why did I actually go and get a degree or stuff like that? If I actually go and get by getting degree, the same competition for the same thing or stuff like that, and all these stuff. And what happened is that you're gonna realize that everything is fundamental. Everything is fundamental, and when you're actually doing this stuff, you're gonna actually realize that you will leave something behind to gain something. Like you don't leave a lesson. You actually don't leave something, but you actually just go back to a place. You have to actually separate stuff. So what happens that I'm out there so on the road, people and that thing out there about you see you listen to the podcast and you listen to the days when I didn't have that's the thing about the podcast. You're so listening to the days that I didn't have what I was praying for. I didn't have all those stuff. I learned about all those experiences about when I did have those stuff. And yeah, what will happen is that I go to the streets, I go to someone else, and they knew about those days. So what happens is that the podcast is for a listener now that actually, and that's the thing about why in the real world when you actually on top of your game in a way where you actually don't matter or you actually just so average is that because the people actually know where you came from and be like, oh, it's just the same college. The podcast is just a way, for someone who and the way for the core people, I will be like, oh, I didn't change. It's just that I'm out there so going more into my craft, and this is just what given the constraint of my time at that time. This was the best way to actually do it. That was the best way to actually do it, and be like, okay, yeah, we didn't change. We didn't change. So that the same thing in the same place, just that that was the best way at the time. And what happens that now when I implement it that way, and reach a certain level, it be like, oh, no, it becomes a luxury. No, what happens? That a person will come in and see me in the recording process, see me in the doing this, I see me doing that, and be like, it doesn't, it doesn't as fun as stuff like that. Or you see me doing that, and be like, oh my god, the pressure, the nervousness, and all these stuff. I be like, yeah. But these stuff are actually you have to actually reinforce these things where you be like, oh, we have to actually reinforce the process. Reinforce the process. Just be like, yo, there was a time that we didn't have these stuff. These stuff are there for the days that we didn't have these. I did these stuff for a reason. So that's the reason why I be like sometimes they talk about back in the days. It's a good thing that I have the paper that shows that okay, I actually finished the university days I have a picture that show me that a couple years later to remind me of how I validated that tree. And that those are stuff me actually get certain stuff and sometimes kind of forget why you get those stuff. So boom, the paper was to actually say, yo, we got the piece of paper to show that yo, we actually did this thing for 3 years. That graduation picture with 2021 on it, even though it should say 2018, I'm like, I wish, but the valid thing about 2021 in 2025 is that it was validating things that I was trying to implement after I graduated. Not giving my low point, giving my low point. Say that picture was personal to me. So it's like that's the thing now. If I would actually take that picture in 2018 or stuff like that, back in the days and go to the whole graduation process, it'll be just like every other graduation from high school, matriculating. I'll be like, oh my god, yes, it's just another day. But that was a way to validate what I was at the time. So that's the reason why it's be like, okay, I go back to a person see me 20 in the university days. I'm like, oh, what I'm saying, I go on the field is like, oh, God, what? You see me in the it is this is what you call practice. This is what you call the practice days, and the practice days in what you call a science field or what might be is in a competent thing. It's very long. It's very long. It's like it that's the thing. Even the universities, it's if you actually want to do it right, it takes very long to implement the thing right. And when you actually implement it right, you don't have to do it again. It just becomes a luxury. But you don't have that when you're actually in the working world and all these stuff. You always have to be rushing and all these stuff. You always have to be rushing the process and stuff like that. But now, if you actually take the time to actually do it right, it becomes a luxury and you don't have to actually worry about it anymore. It'll be like, oh yeah, yeah. So that the reason why, oh, you see me in the process of doing this stuff and be like, oh, the process, the process is the or just be like, oh yeah, you see, not or that's the thing about guys. Be like, okay, I want to talk. You would hear me back in the days, and I say core fans, and be like, oh, every day we talk about it, not girl and stuff like that. No, what I would the thing about being a nerd and stuff like that, go through the process of actually getting it right, getting the girl right, all these stuff. But that's the reason why when I grew up in a country like mine, why American shows are those stuff were so relevant compared to the country. If you go into a different country, content is so relevant to them is because they are portraying the stuff that they lack in their country and all these stuff. So what happens is that if you actually were born in my place, you have to be a natural expert at everything. You have to be out there to be a natural expert. You don't have time to be a novice. Being a novice, you're out there to being pushed. You're being pushed out and be like, oh, but what happens is that when you actually go through the process and then the novice now becomes the amateur, it actually it actually makes it become more stupid. So you'll be like, oh, because that's the thing we're actually going when you actually reach a stage when the when the where the pro when the expert becomes a novice. When the expert becomes a novice, that's where everything falls apart. Where it be like, yo, you you're born a country where you actually have to be in the result. You have to be out there top this, top that. Then you see the underdog out there kitchen. You see the underdog kitchen. And all those things out there are being praised for, it just falling flat. It just being falling flat very quickly. Like that's the thing, now, bro. Like, oh, being the being the Cooper, that's the thing about matriculating. The high school days was the high school days. Boom, you're matriculating to being you were the popular person and stuff like that. Boom, the under we rock bottom. The natural affinity of going out to be like, oh, the bottom is the bottom, the unpopular is the unpopular. Then boom, we out there be there. You join us in the unpopular. You join us in being the nerd or stuff like that. So there's a validate now, yo, there's a boom. Then you have the clicks in the stuff, clicks in the stuff, bro. and be like, yo. So that's the thing, with my experience, would be like, yo, the podcast is just a way to say, yo, this is me. This is the same me, bro. It's just a new way. It's a new way, and what happens is that the clicks will be there and the fans will be there. See, what will happen is that the outcome will always be the outcome. Same way. And the reason why the outcome is always the outcome same way is because natural tendency. We naturally just tend to do certain stuff, and the certain stuff is the wrong way. The certain stuff is the wrong way, and we actually have to when you're actually going out and do it and do it, you will be like, oh, so that's the reason why in the podcast you'll be like, okay, I make the podcast, or people out there from my university or my high school there, they listen to me making a podcast, or people that say something out of sight, out of mind. As someone say that and stuff like that, I'll be like, bro, I was actually there. For some reason, I was out of sight, out of mind. Sometimes I have to actually come. I'm actually doing stuff, and that's the thing where I be like, oh, that's the thing about it. 29 year, bro. You're there, so you're still not on your time. That's the sad thing about the 29. You're still not on your time yet. So sometimes this thing about other side, other mind, it's actually valid to them. It's actually a valid thing to say even with a even with a degree for 7 years and stuff like that. But them saying something like other side, other mind is still valid. Because in their mind, bro, they still have that person. Stuff like that. But there's always have stuff to do. You always have stuff to do to dominate. We have stuff to do. And it's like, yo. But at each level, each time it goes, the stuff gets more. The stuff gets more. And you have to actually repeat this stuff. Repeat the core fundamentals at a higher level. At a higher level. So remember, say I was at the basement doing the stuff and just cleaning up my room, just focusing up something. Don't have to just doing the same thing to a house in the fourth year while working on all these stuff and all these. And what will happen is that you that in back in the days are other thing about all these stuff. Like the thing about the compound effect you will see you start living what you always talk or living what you always see people do. Like oh that's the funny thing what it's about. You're living the experiences. You're like, oh, you're out there so talking about um um I remember the days I'm out there wishing about being in a house and stuff like that. Boom. I'm already in the fourth year and all this stuff. And after actually all this will be doing the things them and it gets harder and harder. And it's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. These things are actually obvious. So what means that you out there so I be like, yo, nothing did a change. Nothing did a change. It's just a new year. And what will happen is that now the only thing that changed was that all the stuff that people think that were cool back then, I become so it suddenly becomes a necessity for me, to actually get them. So back in the days, we're having a car going out, have 10 million woman now shows there, this or that. Those weren't the, you know, but hey, no, it actually become valid now. No, I actually have to go out and be like, and that's why I have the universities. Then even the universities, bro, boom, I did that fall off, and then those stuff happen. Those stuff, those stuff happen. Where be like, yo, but that's the thing. Where be like, you have to be able to balance your passion and everything. But what I realized was driving, actually doing the lessons was that you're out there so driving and doing the driving and stuff like that. And that there is a reason why they have private property, all these properties and all these stuff and all these places because when I was growing up, I'm in the house. And what my grandmother or family usually tell me to do that when night comes, come into the house. Come into the house and stuff like that. While you have a tendency, of people out there. So that's the thing about I said the family that I was raised in. they raised me a certain way for a certain reason, and you know, you have to actually go through it to understand why. I'll be like, so there's a time now where people going out in the when night comes, grandmother or family will say, yo, go into the house, go home or stuff like that. But part of the family will be like, no, the whole family like they will be like, go into the house or stuff like that. And be like, yeah, why should you go into the house? During the driving experience, what I realized was that once you're on the road, yes, yes, the road is not owned by you. The road is not owned by you. So people is on the road for whatever reason, and you out there so is a the house when you're out there so the house is owned by once you're in the house you're out there so owned by somebody you actually know or stuff like that. Somebody related to you. But once you're out in the streets, you're out there so with on your not on your own. Not on your own. You're out there in the streets, you're out there so not on your own. So you assume all the risk that comes with all this of being on the streets. You know, it's assume all the risk with being on the streets. So it'd be like, yo, what I actually realized was actually doing the class and actually coming and going doing the um in the 40 year pro ownership was that one of the things was that my grandmother always there. Always come in the house at night and lock the doors and stuff like that. And why is that is because yo once you're out there so driving, you don't know what the people out there to drive. People have the luxury to drive, so we actually just do it for whatever reason. People have the luxury to do certain stuff now, so we're doing this stuff now. We become an adult now. You know that thing about the university days. You leave your home and you become who you want it to be. Those days, you become who you want it to be, and it's like oh the freedom, bro, the freedom. But there's a reason why back at home they teach you certain principles that boom when actually go to implement them, it becomes apparent and be like, oh yeah. It's a reason why a university graduate is different from you go to the same high school, you go to the same high school. See my school, see or what a principle is a principle. So what means that boom, I study chemistry and then boom, sixth form we go and study. 12 studies chemistry, but when we go to the next level, we separate. And we're both doing chemistry, we're both doing the same thing. But we have two different teachers. What happens that the teacher's principle, either one of the two things will happen. Either the teacher's principle or the chemistry principle will live. And whichever and what happens that only time will tell which one was the better one. Which one was the better one? Was it the teacher's principle or was it the chemistry principle? Which one was the better one? Now those are things that separate that stand the test of time and be like, oh, was it the teacher principle? So if I would actually go and do it because I actually went to this school back in the days and get that teacher principle, I'm one up. Even if I switch things like that and it's a different thing. So it's like the same thing. But the principle is what they implement that actually just coming like, yo, make us always on the top because that those days were foundational to us. They'll be like, yo, those days are foundational to us. They'll be like, anywhere we go, that foundation will always make us ahead, ahead. So like, and that's the so it's like those are the things they'll be like, yo, when you actually go on the road now, you see people. The luxury of the road is they driving. You don't forget the level that you're. So that when I'm actually driving now and stuff like that, the bus being a passenger, all these stuff, bro. Regardless, the road is the road. The road is the road, and you don't know what you're actually doing on the road until you actually do it. So you assume the risk. The competency of stuff is actually assume the risk of what you're doing on the road. So if you actually say, okay, you're gonna go to X place or X place, you assume all the risk that comes with that. So it's like, oh, when certain things happen, be like, and that same thing will happen. Something will happen with me, but like, yo, when that happened to me, it's like, yo, I deserve to be out there to be called out and be like, yeah, yeah, that's stupid. Because what you realize going through, I realized going through the driving process was that once you're on the road, you do not know what the person on the road is going on the road for. All they know that the road exists. The road exists for a certain reason to enable better traveling. And once the better traveling comes now, you just have to be like, yo, you have to travel for the right reason, bro. You have to travel. That's it. That's the first. Travel for the right reason before you're out there traveling at all. Then when they actually can travel, no, it becomes traveling for the right reason, bro. Then they can start travel anywhere because what becomes a luxury now of all this of traveling, bro. So it's like every day out there's a traveling and people this have to be that's the reason why I try all this have to be worried about. Where the hell are you going, bro? How this actually it means that you do not have the right to travel. You don't have the right to travel as yet. You this have to be out this in the baby stage. But it's just like yo, over time now, when you actually make competent stuff, competent move, we be like, okay, we can actually make proper movement. We can actually come out and move you with this place, move you. I really don't have to actually worry about you going about and running around and stuff like that. And even that with limits as well. Even with that as well, you have limits to stuff as well. You're running around and be like, okay, you're running around, then you want to push the limits. Boom, you assume the risk of that limits. You assume the risk of that limits and be like, oh, yeah, you assume the risk of that limits. And it's like, then you hear something like, oh, you're missing. And it's like, oh, what happens? Like, assume the risk of that limits. But what happens is that the limits are there. Everything there is a perimeter. Everything can be found. That everything lost can be found. And it's like, yo, the limit is just that because yo, you out there so wasn't in the limits. Yo, there's a past the limits to actually assume the risk of the limits. And it's like, yeah, I have the luxury. I have the luxury to do that. I actually work for the privilege to do that, to test those limits. So when I actually come in now, you see me out here, so missing in action, and be like, oh my god, bro, I actually earned the right to actually about this and be missing in action, bro. Be like, oh yeah, when you check the credential, bro, it's like, oh yeah, yeah, he actually had the right to actually about this to be missing in action, bro. He actually was indeed had, they had the right to be missing in action, bro. So those are stuff where be like, yo, certain stuff is actually driving. What I realized on the road was that on the road, once actually I touch the road and drive for a while, you realize you don't not know what you are going on the road for. So you have to actually be more intentional with what you're going on the road for. You have to be actually more intentional. It becomes more clear and be like, oh, I'm going on the road because I'm going to X home or stuff like that. Permission. Usually I watch Vampire Diaries and stuff like that and be like, oh yes, actually I get permission to come into the house and stuff like that. Those things are actually proper courtesy. Proper courtesy of actually coming and be like, yo, we actually need permission to come in the house. It's just like consent and everything. Consent. You just actually come in and be like, yeah, we actually doing this stuff. So that yo, when actually coming in down, it clear. Clear, it don't come there's no misunderstanding. We actually have a proper handshake. And it's like it clear. It clear so that um and and stuff like that. But at the same time, once you can actually invite someone in, there should be a time where you can okay uninvite somebody. So they actually come in the back and be like, oh yeah, actually have to redo this stuff now. To actually come back and renew. That's the thing where there's an expiration for everything. There's a expiration of everything so that yo to read I renew what we actually was doing before. I renew it in a better way. Renew it in a better way. There's actually a different way of doing everything. And we're like, oh, yo, this so coming back now. So it's like, oh, we're coming back in a different way. So it's the same thing now, same inviting, but yo, we're coming back in a different way. It's just village is just that it's a different way. So that's the thing when I actually did the driving, what I realized was that I actually get exposed to different neighborhoods more. Right? I'm like, oh yeah, I see different perspective now and I'm in a better position now to actually implement them in my area, in my area. But at the same time, when I actually was doing that, what I realized was that I can't be just be out there so running up and down, be like, okay, I'm gonna go around in this neighborhood and stuff like that. You know, if I actually run up around going on this neighborhood, then boom, I got killed and stuff like that. I assumed the risk of I it was warranted because I wasn't supposed to be doing that in the first place. But going on the road, what I realized, you actually have certain privileges when you actually unlock certain stuff that give you ideas to experience different places or different things. But don't overstay your welcome. Don't do things outside of what you were supposed to do. Don't go out there and be like, oh, overplay your hand because what means you overplay your hand and then you get what you were asking for. That's you actually get what you were asking for and be like you you know you actually was working towards that. So it's like so there's nothing we can actually do about that. You're actually working towards going there. So we can actually do anything but if you actually want help, we can try to help you to get you back out of that area. So that's it. That's the thing where we be like, something um going through that experience for me realize that uh driving everybody is on the road for a reason. You have to be more intentional about the reason that you're on the road. And once you know the reason that you're on the road, it's intentional to you because everybody else has permission to use the road. Everybody out there, so even that's why drive by and stuff like that. All they also are free to do. It's just that at the same time you don't know. That's the reason why you have to always protect yourself. Always have to protect yourself and stuff like that. Everything is there for a reason. But know that you actually unlock that levels now. You have to be like, okay, no, no. No, I actually see that you're okay. No, I see all them people like what no I actually understand why when I was growing up, being younger or being in the younger years, um, leaving the house was such a taboo thing. Like, if you don't have going around with adults, supervised adults and stuff like that. Even high school days and stuff like that, I would actually go out and be like, all those stuff are there for a reason. All those stuff was there for a reason because when actually going out and experience those, I'll be like, okay, yeah, like the older you get, the freer you become. And what happens is that the privilege of those freedom, you have to assume the privilege of those freedom. Like, okay, yeah, yeah, we can't just run up and down. What you I they say, you get what they don't get, as they say. So that's the reason why like in the average person, my average core fan would be like, they will see me out here, so speaking my native tongue and be like, and then try to switch it up or stuff like that. Because a different audience, different reactor trying not to be, have to code switch after call it like, we're always trying to reach a new level. And with each new level there's new obstacle. It'll be like, we start off one way, but we're not we're the same person, bro. We're the same person, just that we we have different requirements. We have different requirements, and it's like, okay, we have to actually meet those requirements. And when you actually meet those requirements, you actually learn something different and be like, oh, oh, oh. So back in the days of novice, of just going through the process of learning to drive, of just learning to drive, that phase is gone. That excitement phase of learning to drive is gone. What you actually realize now is actually you realize now the actual thing of neighborhoods and all those stuff. Why the thing have proper handshake, proper entry into a neighborhood, these stuff. These stuff are actually important now. It be like, you actually have to be like proper introduction and stuff like that. Proper introduction to a neighborhood, the proper things like that have to be properly done. Have to be properly done. And be like, okay, properly enter stuff. And those are your build a culture and stuff like that. You properly enter the things right correctly. Correctly and be like, okay, and those stuff. And be like, yeah, you don't go out there and try to work this up. Shark up the system, bro. Shark up the system. Be like, yo, yeah, you were that person back then, bro. But no, you weren't that person back then, bro. You're still the same person, bro. It just I'm still the same person. It's just that I actually there was I do things a certain way, and the more the more I actually um the higher level I go, the higher I actually understand why they were done that way. Sometimes I'll be like, oh, no, I realize why when somebody say out of sight, out of mind, bro. No care what, I know I'm on the right because yo, legit. If we the family actually was raising me a certain way, bro. So it's like legit. The only thing can actually be wrong is you being on the wrong side of the side. That's the only thing can be wrong is that yo, you actually was on the wrong side of the side, like legit. Cause yeah, they actually the growing up was we ain't getting these we wasn't getting these things on a silver spoon. We wasn't getting these things on a silver spoon. So they were actually the only thing people can say about all that side of the mind is the fact that yo, you were on the wrong side, bro. Yeah, so that's basically that thing for the episode. Be like, okay, driving and stuff like that. You go to see different experiences and stuff. You're experiencing different places a different way. I'm actually unlocking an experience different way and feel like people is like, oh my god, you've been a driver so much time and stuff like that. It's right to do it formally. That's the thing. That's the difference between a competent. Why if people struggle to get these stuff and all these stuff because what happens is that oh not because they naturally can do it doesn't mean you must shortcut the process of getting it. Or shortcut you actually must do it formally. Actually must do it formally that you actually get it and be like, oh okay, we all get it. We all get it right. And it's like okay, we actually get it formally now. No, we don't have to be no, we don't have to be if and buts. And if and buts, even if we get it formally, we can actually be like, yo, new people, we can actually come in and be like, okay, yo, we don't, people can fall off, fall off. And be like, oh yeah, we need a pick me up and all. People can fall off, even when we get it formal. Yeah, so actually can fall off and be like, okay, yeah, but not because you're out there so 10 times or stuff like that. There's a reason we actually do this. There's a reason why we actually have to go back and be like, yo, because the what? Not those of are obvious. But we actually had to go through the process to actually realize why we actually do this stuff. So now we actually going through that process, that experience made me realize why when the night comes down, why my grandmother or my family usually say, come into the house. Come into the house. Because what happens is that when I was growing up, what I realized was that the road is not for you. The road is not your road. It's the family's house. So that's the reason why we come here as like, okay, we have that privilege. But the road is not for you. The road is not for you. So when the road is not for you now, um when in the daylight there are certain things that in the daylight, in the daytime, certain things will can be avoided easy, but in the nighttime it's actually harder to avoid those stuff. It's actually harder to avoid those things in the nighttime. And be like, okay, yeah, yeah, we actually learned that now. And it's like, oh yeah. So it's like, going through that process and going around, reinforce those stuff. Reinforce those stuff and be like, okay, we actually went through. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we actually can't do it. It does that we go through the process to actually understand why certain things were happening. So we'll be like, okay, you understand this way older now. Yeah, yeah. We can actually say that for that experience. Like, okay, we actually understand this. And this relates to the episode, will be like, okay, oh, a grandmother or something like that. First doesn't become a person. It's just that we have a certain tendency to do stuff. And then that tendency does translate over time and then boom, you're out there. So and then the relationship change. That's how then tendency does happen more and be like, okay, no, we actually know why. So what can you do to be like, okay, I will skirt all those knowledge and be like, okay, we ain't doing that for that reason, bro. But hey, now we actually know why we ain't doing that for that reason. Now we actually know why we ain't doing that for those reason. Now. But what happens is that you have these things now we call prevention better than cure. Because you're always doing the prevention now. What makes me doing these stuff actually look stupid in real life? Because you're always preventing all these stuff. Actually preventing all these stuff. So since we are this and how we're doing the preventative measure, we actually look very terrible in real. We actually look very uncool. We actually look very uncool in real life because we actually were doing the preventative measure from the start. And it's like, oh, we actually were doing the preventative measure from the start. So it's like, yo, we actually look very uncool doing this stuff because we're actually doing it right and all this stuff. So yeah, so that's basically it for this episode. I'd be like, yo, uh, doing that experience actually understand something in being a homeowner experience it. But the about it is that when you actually become an adult and a homeowner, you have a tendency to actually avoid these lessons. And that's the reason why your grandmother's lessons are grandmother's lessons because the same process that you go through when you actually become an adult, you have to actually go through it. But no, you don't have the luxury of being like, okay, you have someone to orbit you and be like, oh, you're there to protecting you and stuff like that. You actually have to go out in the streets and do it yourself. But no, you actually know the reason why they those stuff they happen because what happens is that when you're actually on the road, you are you do not own the road. You do not own the road. You own the home. You own the home that you are. So it's like you have the luxury of uh, protecting your area. But once you're on the road, you are leaving your area and going on somebody else's property, property, or property, not your area. So now you have to follow the rules and guide. I assume all the risk that comes with those stuff. You accept all the terms that comes with going on the road. Now you be like, okay, yeah, we accept all these terms now. When going out and getting when I drive by, I come now and then boom bang quick. And in the home, and you're not, and you're outside of the house in the night now. You have somebody like my grandmother would just say, yeah, put him in the grave, bro. Because yo, she actually told us to say yo, be in the house at night, bro. So when we actually come in out and be like, yo, and the drive by comes and see all this and then she can actually come out though. She don't need a degree, She don't just come out and see. Or you got shot out there outside of the house. So it's like, bro, it's like, oh, we actually realized that you were actually not following the rules. So what happened was actually warranted. That was actually warranted. So it's like we told it for that for a reason. So that growing up in my family now, I actually understand those stuff. That's basically it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and look forward for the next episode.
Well, this is the end of the episode. Thanks for watching and look forward for the next episode. To support this podcast, go to anchor.fm/cssb/support or become a sponsor for this episode. If you have a product that you want to have more exposure, DM me on the Instagram page, Reframing Mindset Podcast, or on Twitter at ReframingP. Either way would help. Thank you regardless for listening, and here's a preview for the next episode.